Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. On Monday, the Canadian province of New Brunswick had an election, and the Progressive Conservative Party walked away with the majority government despite enjoying only 38.8% support in the province. So today I'm going to talk about proportional representation because this bothers me, whether it's the Conservatives or the Liberals who win a majority with less than a majority of votes. It's ridiculous. You know, it's unfair to Canadians who want to exercise their democratic right to vote but have their votes discounted by a broken system like first past the post. Here's some quick math numbers, right? In terms of which parties people supported going into this election, the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick had 38.8% support. The Liberal Party had 32.2% support. The Green Party had 17.8% support. The People's Alliance Party had 7.1% support. And the New Democrat Party had 3.2% support. Now, in terms of how the seats ended up in a first past the post system, 38.8% of support for the PCs turned into 55% of the seats in the legislature. 32.2% of support for the Liberals turned into 35% of the seats available in the legislature. So already these two parties are being overrepresented in a system. The Green Party had 17.8% support, and yet they have only 6% of the seats. They won a third of the seats that they would have had otherwise in a proportional representation system where we take into account popular party support. The People's Alliance Party, 7.1% support, only got 4% of the seats. And the NDP, with only 3.2% support, got 0% of the seats. This doesn't in any way reflect the actual wishes of New Brunswickers. Whether they are Liberals or Conservatives or Greens or NDP or People's Alliance, no one is accurately represented here, and it's infuriating. It's the same thing, and people rightfully pointed this out when Justin Trudeau's Liberals won a majority with, again, like 36 or 38% of the national vote. It's ridiculous that this system is allowed to exist, and it's unfair to all parties. If you just look at the numbers from this most recent example in New Brunswick, a majority of people did not want a majority conservative government, but because of the system, that's what they got. A majority of people in the last federal election did not want a liberal, in the last election, sure, they wanted a liberal minority, but not a minority that's practically a majority. They only need a few votes from any one party to pass any legislation. And even then, in the 2015 election, not a majority of Canadians wanted either the Conservatives or the Liberals to be in power. It's ridiculous. And some people will say, oh, well, if we have proportional representation and no one wins a majority anymore, how can things get done? I don't know. Look at the past year of the pandemic and how much stuff got done because parties like the NDP and the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives had to hold the Liberals to account. God forbid a government is held accountable by other representatives of the electorate, which is supposed to hold the government accountable. Like, what? Yeah, of course minority systems work. They only don't work if people want to get petty and start squabbling and try and make power plays. But then under an actual proportional representation system, if there is ever majority support for one kind of party, then it will actually be reflected in the legislature. Instead, voices are ignored, and this happens for all parties. Think about it. If you are someone who thinks, oh no, I don't like the idea of proportional representation. Like we'll go through some examples, right? If you're a conservative, you probably don't like the idea of proportional representation because it means that you're not ever going to see another conservative majority government in your lifetime, and that scares you because you don't like a lot of left-wing progressive things, and you feel that the country is being lost to whatever boogeyman flavor of the day you have. So I get that. But also, by not supporting proportional representation, look what happened in the past several elections, right? Representation from the prairies is pretty much non-existent. And if you also look at the country as a whole, think of other people who can, other voices, other conservative voices who would actually be heard in a proportional representation system. Conservative voices from the territories, Northern Ontario, Quebec, the suburbs of Toronto, the maritime provinces. Conservative voices from around the country will be allowed to be heard in the halls of democracy. If you're a liberal, you probably don't like the idea of proportional representation because you recognize, because of the way the system is set up, it's really easy for you to get majority governments sometimes. And the idea of not having access to this anymore and having to actually work with other parties kind of scares you because, again, you like it when you can have solid majorities and broad swaths of support and win elections by targeting a handful of areas, mostly urban areas like the lower mainland of BC, the Greater Toronto Area, Ottawa, the Maritimes, and Quebec. Like, I get it. That's like, hey, if we just target here, we can win majority governments and ignore the rest of the country. But think about it this way. If you actually pass proportional representation, if you still have the greater plurality of seats and can govern with the confidence of the House, you can still pass legislation and say, look, we did all this great stuff. That's what you're doing right now, where the NDP are making sound policy positions, and you guys are saying, oh, I don't know about that. And then a month later, turning around and saying, yeah, you know what? We're definitely going to talk about universal basic income and nationalizing greater elderly care and like these, nursing homes that became such a hotspot for COVID-19 and pharmacare and dental care. We're going to do all these things that the NDP have been talking about for years. But guess what? Because you're the party that's in power currently, that gets to be your lovely legacy. So you still get to have those things. And think about it. Under a proportional representation, liberal voices in places like rural Ontario, the prairies, the interior of BC, these get to be represented in a wider full body in the halls of democracy. If you're an NDP person, you obviously love the idea of proportional representation because it means more NDP voices, whether they are in liberal or conservative constituencies from around the country, get to be heard. It's the same with the Green Party. The only party that this doesn't really benefit is the Bloc Québécois because they're a regional party. But all other main national parties of Canada benefit in different ways from proportional representation. It allows for more voices to be heard. And it already enjoys incredible support from Canadians. Something like, it's in the sources down below in the description, but something like 72 or 76% of Canadians are in favor of proportional representation. The country wants this to happen. And if a government is supposed to represent the will of the people, then this should happen. This should be a government priority, and it should be supported by all major federal parties because at the end of the day, it benefits all of you. A greater voice for those marginalized, whether you're on the left wing or the right wing and across the country, that enables a better and more fair and egalitarian discourse and representation in this vast, wonderful country of ours. It needs to happen. But the fact that it's just not on any government's radar is what's bothering me today.